Welcome back to Our Voices, Our Stories, where we are recording the history of gay men living in North Carolina. Welcome back, Austin.
Thank you.
I'd like to pick up where we kind of left off and talking about that word redemption and going a little bit further and moving into, gay spirituality or spirituality in general as a gay person. Talk to me.
Yeah. So there's an old dictum from the Church Fathers that says that what Jesus has not assumed, God has not assumed in becoming human. God has not redeemed. What Jesus has not assumed, he has not redeemed. And so I began looking a few years ago. So you get through coming out. But then beyond direct homophobia, you've got to interact with heterosexism, the general dis-ease in society about whether you're affirming or not, but also to see some of that internalized homophobia. I had to get to a better spot than just saying God's okay with my sexuality. Something else had to happen. And so I remember as a child, as an adolescent rather, thinking about how to grapple with the temptation of sex and attraction to forbidden fruit. And I remember thinking about this text in 1 Corinthians, where I believe it's 1 Corinthians, and Paul says that Jesus was tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. And to someone battling what I thought was a unique temptation, I had to believe that. Now, granted, I'm talking about this framework that I used to live in, not now.
Right.
But I had to believe that Jesus knew somehow the temptation of a love he could not pursue. So Jesus, if he has been tempted in every way as I am, has to be at least bi. Now, I read that text differently now. I don't think of it in quite the same way. I still think it's a valuable text, dealing with anger at people who have hurt us, choosing to love and not to hate. Right. Jesus knows the temptation to do that and chose not to do it. That's still a powerful text. But now I've found that that God has shown me a more generous way of assessing my sexuality. And part of this happened in an experience I had a few years ago in which this became particularly vivid. So when I finished seminary, I had a mental health crisis that reset my spirituality. I had, lots of detail, lots of moving parts here, but this showed some pathology in my theology, in my spirituality, and so I had to find a God worth believing in, a God worth loving. And one of my favorite theologians, Paul Tillich, once said that God is the God who appears when the deity you thought was God has disappeared. So I had to learn to grapple with this in a new way. So anyway, in this sort of rebuilding of my spirituality, I spent 3.5 years discerning with an Episcopal monastery in New England, and believed passionately that I ended a relationship, my first relationship for this.
Wow.
Believed that was my destiny, my calling. It was to me as clear as day. And so I kept thinking, what do I do with my sexuality as a celibate? Again, thinking about that birdcage line that became so important to me. I worked too hard for this to give it up.
Right.
And so perhaps more on that later, but I remember, so I was praying more, as one does when you're hoping to be a monk, and I had this. For me, prayer is not so much, oh Father, I pray for Stuart whose ankle is afflicted. That happens. Yeah. You intercede, but it's also interior. It's imaginative. It can be anything, and so somehow, the mind. We have imaginings that are not visions. And they're not apparitions, but they're a little more powerful than mere imaginings. They're interior locutions is the term for it technically. Okay. That is, something happens in the imagination that captivates your attention. It unfolds unto you rather than you causing it to unfold, so consciously so at least.
Okay.
So you can have sensory experience with this. And it may not last very long, but it's powerful. It's memorable. and we all experience these. So many of us do. God told me this, or that's, you didn't hear an audible voice. I highly doubt, but you had something that transfixed your attention. Anyway, I was praying, and the image that I was staying with, that I felt the Spirit was bringing to me, was the beach. And so I'm walking along the beach with Jesus, and we're walking along the shore. There's the sound of the crashing waves. There's a sunset. It's gorgeous, very idyllic sort of circumstance. And I remember looking over to Jesus, and this is the first time I'd seen him by this time. And I remember being struck by two things. One was that he looked a lot like his pictures in my imagination. He looked like the sort of Warner Salmon portraits that hang in every Church of God in Appalachia.
Yeah.
And he looked like, Michelangelo's, or the Renaissance masters are a little less familiar to me, but what we've thought Jesus to be. That didn't surprise me so much as when I looked at him. Yes, I saw that, but Jesus also looked a lot like a guy I loved in college. So all of this was now fused together. And this Jesus put his arm around me, and you in our imagination, again, we can have sensory experience.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling that kind of dynamic experience of touch that we all know when we've got some kind of chemistry with somebody. It's just like every cell in your body opens up to absorb the magic of it all. And he had this smile as broad and bright as daylight, and then that was the end of it. And it was this, talk about redemption. It was this full, complete embrace of my sexuality. And so that this was just a watershed moment. And one thing I've been thinking about in the years that have passed since that is that who is better equipped for Christian discipleship than a gay man? I don't know how these straight men in evangelical or any Christian setting really handle language like, "Oh Christ, we adore you, we worship you, we love you."
Good point.
Have we really grappled with the full humanity of Jesus? I'm pretty traditional theologically. I believe that in Jesus, God is fully known. That yes, Jesus is fully divine, but he is also fully human. Who is better equipped to worship a man, to adore a man, the man Jesus, than a gay man? And so when we're open to this, when we're open to that in prayer, then we are capable of becoming saints because this brings us into our true self.
Right.
Right. This isn't going to cause you to browbeat yourself, and this. It's like the what is that line from Richard Rohr? The real mystics of us all have seen that God is not judgment, God is love.
Right.
And so I've learned to be suspect of any experience in which God has come out less loving.
I have always loved that God is love. When I was growing up in the church for Easter, the children always had to recite verses in front of the congregation. Yeah. And God is love was one of my favorite ones. Number one, because it was short and sweet. So I didn't have to remember a whole long, 2 sentences or something. But just because it kept it simple. That is simple to me. That's how I can relate to God.
Absolutely. Yes. And that simplicity is still profound.
Yeah.
I delivered a sermon a few weeks ago on John 3:16, which is, just as familiar as the grass under our feet. And it can be really hard to sit with these ideas again if we hear them so well, or they're sanitized of their power by people who don't know how to handle them. But I'm thinking again of redemption. What Jesus has not assumed, he has not redeemed. And so what I needed was a God who was queer. Is Jesus bi or gay? I don't know. But he's queer in some way. And this kind of reflection is our birthright as gay people. You know, it takes trans theologians to look at the story of the virgin birth and say, hey, wait a minute. If Jesus is born without, the participation of male seed, then he's lacking certain chromosomes that define gender,
Right.
making him both. That's powerful.
Yes. Very.
And is all of that black and white, biological fact? I don't know, but it matters. And the story gives you the room to figure these things out. And it's the tragedy of it all is that so many churches have robbed queer people of and this kind of stuff. That you say this to people and it stirs them up.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. But this is our birthright. This is what we're given in baptism, to be able to reflect this way, to find intimacy with God, with the world. In a way I think that God has designed.
I love the way you've positioned that it's our birthright.
Yes.
To question.
And we can't let anyone take that from us.
No, we can't.
Absolutely.
So, gay spirituality and moving onward in your life as you are learning more about who you are and opening up to the possibilities of who you will be. What was that like for you then? What has it been like? It still is ongoing.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Thinking about, one thing I don't think I've shared yet is that I felt called to ministry in 5th grade, and that has never changed. I tried other things here and there, and I, right now I'm not working in full-time vocational ministry, but that calling has stayed with me. And so figuring out, what part of that process of coming out was figuring out, can I preach? Can I be ordained? And then that's when you find, it's the revelation of ministers who were already doing this, who are already, I think of the Metropolitan Community Church, which was forging new roads back in the, what was this, the 70s, the 80s?
Yep.
A congregation that, when this still exists, that is particularly concerned with the LGBT population. I am fortunate to have come of age in a moment when that kind of thought had made it to the main line. That's great fortune for me, because so many, who preceded me would never have had this kind of opportunity. And so, but grappling with the thought, can I what if I marry a man? Justin wants to be the preacher's wife and over the Flower Guild.
Of course he would.
So living into that, learning to accept that, has been a growing process. And now, it's so many of us who were naive enough to think that our society had progressed, that we were making these enormous strides. It's now daunting. To think of taking a visible spot in society as an ordained person who is, openly gay, that 6 or 7 years ago, that sounded okay. But now with the turn of politics, it's going to take the church to sustain her queer ministers, her lesbian ministers, her gay ministers, her trans ministers.
How do you personally do that?
How do I care for myself?
Yeah.
So I know this. I have noticed in my through faults of my own, or shortcomings rather, I go awry when I think that spiritual care is other than self-care. If I'm not making time to be alone with myself. When I was discerning with the monks, that was a lot easier to come by.
Yeah.
And then you fill that time with other things, and so if to care for myself, I have to make time for silence, for solitude, for contemplation. And if I don't do that, I'm not the person I want to be. I don't feel like I'm fully who I am otherwise. Outside of that, I lean heavily into the beauty that is art. I find my soul. I was just in New York for a marathon of operas and plays, and I find my soul. I was sitting in an opera, and I just could feel my body respond to this.
Wow.
To be, and I connect beauty directly to God. An experience of beauty is an experience of God, however it appears, whether that's gay or not. And so that is one way that I keep my head on me, that I keep, to keep beauty at the forefront is one thing that I find particularly energizing. That sustains me. Yeah.
I know you are a big Broadway person.
Yeah, always have been.
Yeah.
And as a child, I can remember having my tonsils removed at about 12 years old, and I spent about a week with a portable DVD player watching Rodgers and Hammerstein on to no end. I mean, I watched them all. And I look at that now, I think, did nobody know?
Nobody else was doing that in your circle, right?
Yeah, right. But and my interaction with art has been, that's really where I learned the most about theology, about spirituality. Something is suddenly embodied, some principle that I've been trying to get at,
right.
Or these have been the real. Experiences of great profundity are usually accompanied by some kind of experience of art, be it literary, be it a poem, like we just talked about, or music, opera, Broadway. Drama is a newer thing to me. That's drama and film. Learning to assess that critically is a growing edge.
I think you still have plenty of time to.
There is time. Yeah.
So. You're not fully ordained
right
now, but you're in the process of that. What is that looking like for you, and where do you hope to go once you are ordained? And
so I'm an Episcopalian now. When I came out, I stayed a Baptist, and everybody thinks that Baptists are all fundamentalists and fire-breathing dragons, and that's not the case. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist.
Yes.
And I can count off a legion of other ones whom we know and respect. But I transitioned to the Episcopal Church after seminary. That became with a monastery. That after 3.5 years of being shaped by them, your spirituality kind of changes.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I traded was, the Baptist can ordain you pretty quickly. Being the free church, there's not a bishop. It operates in a fundamentally different kind of structure.
Gotcha.
And so, being an Episcopalian now, there's committee on committee on committee, and it can be frustrating. And I think there's a point of virtue for me to grow into in patience. So I'm pursuing this process now. It will probably take a few years yet before I am ordained, but it is something I want for myself. I can preach now. I've got the license. I have the degree. I can preach. I'm licensed as to take the Eucharist to people in nursing homes, which I do. But I still want to be with people in moments of, I want to be there at baptism. I want to be there to be able to hand them the Eucharist as it comes straight from the altar. I want to be present. When someone is troubled by something and they come to the church for confession. In the Episcopal Church, the phrase is, some can, some should, but none must.
Oh.
So you don't have to come and with your long list of, you stole candy bars as a child. That's not so much not so much a concern. But I say all this to say it's the priest who does the ABCs, the absolving, the blessing, and the consecration.
Oh.
And so to be able to look at someone and say, I assure you, you are forgiven. That still matters to me. That speaks to me. And so those are the reasons I pursue it now. But I do see that most of my ministry will probably be in preaching, which is where it takes a lot of work. A sermon takes between 12 and 20 hours to straighten out, and wrestling with the text, listening to the text, trying to figure out, if it's calling you to be prophetic. And I'm not prophetic insofar as, I see the rapture in 3 weeks, but to speak truth to power, grappling with that, it it can be tricky.
You've done a remarkable job here with not having a manuscript.
This is scared me so. But it recently, this may be an interesting story to share. When I preached that sermon on John 3:16.
Mm-hmm.
I opened with a very gay illustration. I always try to open with an illustration. I'm not one who preaches. Today, I want to talk to you about salvation. Boring.
Yeah.
With respect to some friends who do it. I try to start with the illustration. So this time I started with, I had written a poem about my first love, which was pretty early in college. And I had a hard time getting over this guy. Hard time. Took years. And then I just had to write this crazy poem. And I was so proud of this thing. I thought, this is going to land me in the New Yorker. This is Poetry Magazine. And it was so bad. It mixed 100 metaphors, and the enjambment doesn't make sense, and it's a disaster. But it was published in the college literary journal.
Cool.
And I shared it with my fraternity brothers on our group chat. Like, hey, I got a poem published in the Lyricist, 2 actually. And so I get to the house where I lived, the fraternity house, and one of my brothers said, "Hey, Maynor, will you read it?" I thought, oh my God, you want me to read this poem about a gay romance? I said, are you sure? Yeah, Maynor, read it. So I read it, and I finished reading it, and he had no more. I mean, he had tried, but he had no more heard the message of the poem than the man in the moon. And he said, "Was that about God, Maynor?" This is the one time, where the Sunday school answer Jesus is not the right answer. So I used that. I mean, it was a weak illustration to try to get us to listen more closely to the John 3:16, which we all know so well.
Well, let's talk about that, because I don't know that everybody that's listening knows that.
That may be true. Yeah. So I'll say it in the King James translation that raised me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And then the next verse is, for me, what's so important. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And I tend to read that 17th verse with that talk we just had about redemption. Mm-hmm. That God took on flesh to save it, to glorify it, not to condemn it.
Right.
So seeing that text is replete with meaning for me, because it says that the Christian idea of God coming down to earth is rooted not in vengeance. God is not eternally pissed off because people broke the 10 Commandments an infinite amount of times. That's not what happens here. He's not coming with blood on his on the tongue. He's coming for the purpose of loving the world. Showing this is the pinnacle of creation, showing all of creation that God is more loving and more gracious than anybody ever thought.
I'm curious, a lot of people will say, where was God when this disaster happened? Or where was God when something, tragic goes on in your personal life and everything? How do you approach that conversation and how do you approach that?
That's a good question. And in the theology books, that's called theodicy. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why the Holocaust? Right. Why 9/11?
Right.
And I don't have a tidy answer for that. I sit with that same kind of doubt, that same kind of anger, and to that end, I want to come back to this question in a second, but one of my heroes, Carlisle Marney, was a liberal Baptist pastor in Charlotte. And he once said, I'd like to live long enough to see the day that God comes back to fix it, but I don't think I will, because God Almighty is not going to come fix something that God has given me the power to do. So where was God in Auschwitz? Well, Elie Wiesel was right. He's hanging in the gallows in some ways. I don't go quite that far, but I see the truth in that. Where was God? I see liberation as the sign of God's activity in the world, and I still don't know why it came as late as it did. But I sit with these questions like anyone else does. And in the end, I'm not convinced that religion has a lot against it. I understand why many in our community have chosen to seek meaning without it, and I don't condemn them.
Right.
I know what it's like to be hurt by the church, by religion at large. It's done a lot of harm in the world, but it's also done a lot of good. You don't have king without the Baptist Church. You don't. You don't have Gandhi without his synthesis of Hindu philosophy with some of the Beatitudes.
Right.
Mother Teresa would not have gone to Calcutta if she had not been persuaded by Catholic theology. So I see the wrong in the world that has been wrought by crusades, that is wrought by Christian nationalists in this country who don't know how to read scripture, don't know how to read government documents, are operating in an entirely different religion than what I'm trying to say is worth a gay man's time.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm also not persuaded by religion because I need a get out of hell free card, or because I'm really persuaded by this because I haven't yet heard a more beautiful story. I've got to have something to sink my teeth into. Who was it? Was it Marx who said that religion was for the weak? Yes, that's exactly right. Religion is for the weak. It's for the people who need something to sink their hands into to find beauty and good in the world. Because I'm not strong enough to find it on myself. I have to have help.
Yeah.
I've got to have a community. I've got to have a story to root me in it.
I think that's the one thing that church and God and people that believe and go to church, at least, the physical space, it's a community. And I think that's one of the beauties that comes out of it, is that we need more community, period, and the exchange of ideas and the forgiveness of each other.
That's right.
We've only got a few minutes left. What else do you want to say to us? Share with us, not say.
Let's see. We have covered so much. Well, here's one thing that may be worth saying. That for those of us who depart the religious traditions of our youth, I have learned that healing happens when. So deconstruction is the technical term for that. It's
right.
That's Derrida. You're deconstructing the elephant in the room, and so everything comes into question, and this has to happen. We all go through this. We all have to constantly be reassessing. The only way faith grows is if it goes through doubt, if it embraces doubt.
Exactly. Rather,
it's not the opposite of faith.
Right.
It's the sibling to faith. It has to grow. But one thing I have learned. In rebuking fundamentalism, in which I was raised, I don't like that tradition. It's done a lot of harm and does a lot of harm today. But to me, successful deconstruction is not necessarily the total abandonment of everything we knew. We have to be able to resource over time the things that still matter, because I'm at war with myself if I get mad whenever one of those hymns I learned as a child is going through my head on a Saturday morning. These things are part of me.
True. Very true.
To embrace Austin and all of who he is to take in these sounds, some of these phrases. It's to resurrect them, to find new ways to make use of the tool of what's in your life, because they're there whether you want them to be or not. Yep.
Yeah.
And that to me has been one of the most profound lessons. I used to hate Southern gospel, and I'm not a big fan of it. I'm too much of a classical, Broadway opera guy to appreciate some of that. But, I had to learn to sit with myself when I teared up when, I heard "Where Can I Go But to the Lord" from Elvis. This is impacting me in some kind of way. Why is that?
Right.
I can let the baggage down, let this thing speak to me now. And then you're not the victim of your story when that happens. You find a way to make friends with the monster.
Yeah.
And that to me has brought a lot of peace.
Austin, this has been a remarkable time.
I've enjoyed
that we have spent together. I've learned, I've grown, I've wept, obviously, And I just really, really appreciate it. You bringing things to the table that need to be discussed and open and honest. And we often don't get that.
Hmm.
And I love that you're looking to bridge that generational gap in this gay, queer, whatever spectrum you want to call it. That's a very important thing. So thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Absolutely. This is, as I think I may have told you, I mean, my one of my best friends is in his early 90s, and I've found part of my growth, where I'm finding is, is gleaning wisdom from generations outside my own.
Yeah.
And that to me has been a real treasure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Audience, wow. What a great time we've had here at this table. I hope you will remember to like this on YouTube, to share it, to subscribe to YouTube, and to continue to follow. And remember, your voice matters, your story matters, you matter. Have a blessed evening.